Recording started. And then I am going to share my screen. That one there will work. Okay. Can we all see my screen? Good, good. So, as I'm sure you're all aware, our topic for today is fall and winter gardening, setting yourself up for success. So we're going to talk about the things that we do in the garden in the fall and winter, and hopefully some of those things can be used to save ourselves a little time and effort in the spring rush as we're all trying to get out in the yard and garden. So a couple things I want to talk about first. Purdue Extension Marion County, we have a mission. We deliver practical research-based information that transforms lives and livelihoods. Our program areas include ag and natural resources, community development, health and human services, and 4-H development. We have a commitment at Purdue Extension Marion County. We value underappreciated communities, and we celebrate human differences by embracing and recognizing the need for diverse and equitable and inclusive structural change. We do this by increasing our programming outreach and partnerships with Black and Brown communities, ensuring representation and full participation of diverse voices and perspectives on all extension boards and committees, and by instituting a kind and trusting culture in our office through the words that we say, the actions we take, and the goals that we set. So here's what we're talking about today. What are the things we can do in the garden to help ourselves prepare for the following season? So I'm going to give you a brief bio about myself. I know I'm new. I've met some of you, not all of you, and I look forward to meeting the rest of you. We're going to go through a timeline of the fall and winter and discuss the things that we should be hopefully taking care of during those times. And then I want to hear from you all. I want to hear what you're doing in the fall and winter to help in the garden. So a brief background on myself. Like I said, my name is Kerry Grable. I'm the home horticulture educator. I graduated from the University of Kentucky with a bachelor degree in horticulture in December of 2009. And I received my master's degree from Murray State University. So in December 2009, I graduated and was immediately hired by UK, University of Kentucky, to be an extension associate for the nursery crop industry. So an extension associate is kind of a grant-funded specialist. So my role in that position was originally meant to help transition tobacco growers into other crops, namely nursery crops. But this was 2010. This was after the housing crash. So I served more as kind of a life support function for a lot of the nurseries in Kentucky to kind of help them stay afloat during a really, really hard time for that industry. We had a lot of nurseries that had to close up shop during that time, but thankfully a lot of good ones survived to this day. I left University of Kentucky in 2018. My wife accepted a position at Butler University, so we picked up and moved to Indiana, and we've been here ever since. I worked as a section grower at Hood's Gardens, that is in Noblesville. So as a grower, I was responsible for plant health, scouting, a lot of watering, fertilizing, chemical application, just anything that had to do with taking that crop from a planted flower plug to a finished product that goes out to a lot of the nurseries, garden centers around here, Sullivan Keystone, all the Sullivan stores, Ace Hardwares, a lot of that comes from Hood's Gardens. So you may have had some of the flowers that I've grown around here. So I am happy to now be the home horticulture educator for the county, and I look forward to many, many years in this position. So let's get started on our timeline. So we're going to start with the long, hot dark of August. So my wife likes to say August is 31 days long. It's hot, and there's no holidays to look forward to. So what are we doing out in the yard during this time? So what I want to start with is pruning your raspberries and your blackberries. So during this time, we have probably already finished our harvest on these crops. So when those harvests are done, we want to prune out and destroy the canes that bore fruit in this year, they're not going to bear any more fruit the following year, but what they will do is harbor insects. So if you have any good questions on that, I can answer those, but I would also recommend a little resource that I actually put together at UK, a pruning demonstration by Dr. John Strang. Really knows his stuff, but we have that available. If you search blackberry pruning demonstration, it is a good resource and it shows you all the cuts to make and kind of examples of what material to take out and what material to leave. So we should also begin seeding new lawns or bare spots in established lawns from mid-August through mid-September. So some of these time ranges may overlap, but so this is a good time to think about seeding cool season turf grass. So that's your Kentucky bluegrasses, your perennial ryegrasses, tall fescues, your fine leaf fescues. So that's a late summer to early fall activity. There's actually an excellent resource there, establishing turf grass areas from seed. So we can make those resources available, direct you to them. That's ILINTW1. I looked that up because I got to admit that turf grass is not my strongest suit. But man, I learned quite a bit from reading that one. So that is an excellent resource that for anybody that has any questions about seeding turf grass. So like we said, the long, hot August, so watering is critical. If you want to ask me one of the primary things I learned working at a greenhouse, it's watering, and that it should be done very, very thoroughly and infrequently. So if we are shallowly watering our crops, our grass, our pots, our planters, our gardens, we are going to have shallow rooted plants. So this means that these plants are less drought tolerant. They do not have the roots that are going to reach further down into the soil to reach further for water. But when we water, let's have a container plant as an example, we should probably see some water running out the bottom of that plant. Whatever amount of water it takes to run out the bottom of that pot is what we need to water. So when the weather turns dry, particularly sensitive crops are, those that are newly established. So we need to make sure those are well watered and make sure they get about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of water every 7 to 10 days. So that is a recommendation. It is not a law. We need to keep an eye on our plants, but that just gives you a guideline to show you that we're not going to be out there watering those plants every day. My poor father-in-law planted a beautiful dogwood this year, and then he proceeded to drown it. He watered that thing every single day and then came to me and asked me, well, what's wrong with my tree? Well, it's floating out of the hole. So we have to allow the roots to have some air, and we need to encourage them to go seeking for water. We need to encourage that root to have dry periods and go looking for water. So that helps them get established. So, keep your garden well watered during the dry weather, keep it free of weeds, insects, disease. That'll help them be less stressed. Water deeply and infrequently. And again, shallow watering encourages shallow roots. So you can extend your blooms in August, kind of push those flowers into the fall if you keep them pinched. So pinching promotes further flowering, and it kind of improves the plant overall appearance. So there's a lot of plants, petunia, geranium, marigold, speedwells, coreopsis, that will re-bloom after deadheading because those spent blooms tell the plant to form seed as opposed to continue to forming blooms. So if we keep those plants pinched, then we can further encourage those plants to produce more nice, pretty blooms and extend those seasons on into the fall. So you need to let your woody plants harden for the winter. So that is largely a question of fertilizing. You don't need to fertilize them too late into the fall if they are pushing fresh growth in colder times, and that fresh growth is going to get burned. So the image I have there shows an example of cold injury. So if you see that kind of wilting, browning, kind of damping off look, that is a cold injury. So we don't need to be fertilizing too late into the fall. It really depends on the crop. So you'll have to look at the plant in question. But woody plants in particular, we need to allow that time for them to kind of harden their fresh growth off to turn that into more woody material that's better able to survive the winter months. All right, September. I'm not gonna lie, this is gonna be a long one. I've got a long list for September. So here we go. September gardening, planting B&B nursery stock. So what is B&B? That's balled and burlap plant material. So this is a good time for balled and burlap plant material. We need to think about site preparation. There's a lot of recommendations. You'll hear a lot of things say that you need a hole that's twice as big as the root ball. I'm not really quite as strongly a proponent about having that large of a hole, but we do need to have a hole that's larger than the root ball itself. That helps break up that tough dirt material and helps the soil be looser for rooting. So we're gonna prepare a good sized planting hole wider than the ball, but plant at the same depth that it grew in the nursery. That is key. We cannot bury these plants. If we plant them too deeply, then we are going to eventually kill that plant. So try and find the root flare that comes out at the base of the tree, and that should give you an indication of the soil level that you should have that thing sitting. Water it in. This is key. I worked with an old nurseryman for many years, Dr. Wynn Dunwell, and that was one of the things he taught me when we were planting the balled and burlap plant material. Let's just take that hose and let's stick it in the bottom of that hole before we put the tree in. And then we're going to turn that hose on and we're going to mud that thing in. Obviously, at the end of that, you're going to take your hose out. But watering in is very key. It helps to remove those air pockets that may form around that hole. It helps you get the soil in there. Mulching is going to help protect against, fluctuations in soil temperature. That'll help you keep that plant moist enough to get established. And we have another recommendation from Purdue. We have a guide on tree installation that can walk you through this whole process. So there is the number there, FNR 433W. That is a good resource on tree planting. Garden sanitization. I put this in September, but realistically, this is a year-round thing. But why I put it in September is because I want you to think about at that time of year, we have a lot of fallen fruits, twigs, leaves, that are going to harbor some disease issues, and that can resurface in the fall if we keep that source of pathogen in our garden. So we need to clean up those fruits, twigs, leaves, crabapple in particular. If you think about fire blight, that's the image we have here. That pathogen can overwinter in the plant material that's scattered around the ground. So that fungi will wait in the dormant state until the following spring, and then the warmer weather and the rain is going to wake it up and the spores are going to pop and it's just going to reinfect all your plants. So keep an eye on your plant material that is diseased and try and remove any of that disease material. So again, we got to think about our lawn a little bit. Fertilizing, again, not my strong suit, but we really have some excellent resources here at Purdue. So the cool season grasses, we're going to look at fertilizing the Kentucky bluegrasses, the perennial ryegrass, the tall fescue. So to promote the lawn's recovery from summer stress, we need to apply high nitrogen fertilizer at a rate to about a half pound to a pound of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square foot. So what does that mean? When you buy fertilizer, we have the NPK values, and N means nitrogen, and then we have all those different numbers. So what Purdue has done is they've created this resource that will help you calculate, okay, if I have a 20 in front of my N, then how many actual pounds of this fertilizer do I need to use per 1,000 square foot? So we have the fertilizing established cool season lawns, maximizing turf health with environmentally responsible programs, and that will help you calculate the fertilizer needs for your fall fertilization. All right, so what about dividing our fall plants? So things like peonies, we're going to do that in late September, early August. It's again a little bit of an overlap. And again, that's the state flower of Indiana. So daylilies, August 15th through August 30th is the recommendation for daylilies in the state. Iris, and then we kind of need to keep an eye on these things that we're transplanting. We're dividing them up and transplanting them. Again, we need to keep an eye on them for water needs. So we're dividing them and transplanting them on a pretty relatively dry and hot time of year. So again, provide supplemental water. This is going to be one of those processes that we'll talk about tool maintenance later, but get yourself a nice sharp spade to help you make some clean cuts. That's very important for dividing. The clean cuts will make healing a lot easier for that plant. So spring flowering bulbs. Why do we plant spring flowering bulbs in the fall? We're doing that because we want those things to get all their bottom growth done before the spring so that they can really focus on that pretty top growth. So they're going to really spend the fall and the winter rooting, and that way in the spring they're ready to pop and really focus all their energy on those flowers that we want to see. So we're looking at this in late September through mid-October. We need to plant only high quality bulbs. If you expect to see anything out of them, you need to start with good plant material. So don't plant anything that's got soft spots in it. Don't plant any rotten bulbs or anything like that. Be aware of where you're getting your plant material, and if you invest in a better bulb, you're going to get a better flower out of it. So bulbs will need a well-drained soil. You can amend the poor soils by adding more organic matter, that's peat, manure, and compost, and that'll help with drainage, which encourages rooting. We talked about that earlier. That is encouraging the roots to seek out moisture. Okay, I've got a series of plants to talk about digging up. I know fall is the time that we're going to be taking some of those bulbs out of the ground as well as putting them in. So let's start with caladium. So caladiums are sensitive to cold temperatures, and so are their tubers. So those should be dug before frost. So I say September-ish at the top because a lot of these plants that we're talking about right now are dependent on the weather. So every year is a little bit different, and we never really know what to expect anymore. But we want to get the caladiums out of the ground before the frost. And then we need to take those tubers that we're digging out. So we're not really keeping any of the top material. We're only keeping the tubers on caladiums. And we want to store those in a warm location for 7 to 10 days. And that's going to help remove some of that surface moisture so that they're not rotting while we're storing them. And to prevent excess drying, we don't want to take them too dry. We're going to put them in storage, and we're going to pack them between layers of vermiculite, peat moss, sawdust, or any of that other kind of similar potting material, and put them in a strong box. And then we're going to have to store them at around 60 degrees. So what about tuberous begonia? These should also be dug before the frost, and we're going to cut those back to 2 inches and then allow that to air dry for 2 or 3 weeks in a warm location. And these we're going to store the exact same way as caladiums, but we're going to have to store those at about 45 to 50 degrees. I know we're going to have a lot of different plant material we have to store at different temperatures, but these are, suggested and optimal ranges, and we can only really do what we can there. But so let's move on to dahlias. Dahlias, we're going to have to cut back to 3 to 4 inches after the first light frost. And I know we don't have control over the severity of our first frost, but first frost come and go, we can start thinking about digging up the dahlias. So dahlias have a fleshy root, so we're going to have to be really careful getting them out of the ground. We need to leave a lot of soil attached on dahlias because that's going to help prevent really breaking up that root structure. And they're really susceptible to drying, so they should be air dried really for only a few hours before you pack them. Same way as we talked about before with that sawdust or that peat moss. And these are going to need to be stored around 35 to 40 degrees. Canna. So canna, you don't really need to bother digging those until after the first frost. So these we're going to cut back to about 4 inches, and we can take a spading fork and we can air dry those for about a week or 2. Canna roots don't really need to be covered. We can just put those in the box and not worry about the covering on those. And then those we're also going to store around 45 to 50 degrees. All right, so that's the end of our digging there. So we need to discuss fall and winter control, winter weed control. If you're using a pre-emergent regime, you need to continue that through the fall and the winter. This is a question of just not allowing anything to get established and not allowing a weed bank to get into your soil. Once it's in there, it's harder to take out. So if you're using like a preen product, I know I personally use preen roughly about every 3 months, but you can continue that through the winter, and that'll help you in the spring, give you less weeding to do. If you don't want to go chemical control, cover crops are actually an option in the home garden. I'm sure if you've been out to our demo garden here at the State Fairgrounds, you've seen cover crops in action in the winter. So cover crops can actually have a lot of benefit over weed control. So we're going to plant these things in mid to late September. And with these, we can help improve the soil quality. Depending on what we plant, we can be adding nitrogen back into our soil, or we can incorporate these cover crops back into the soil when we're done with them. And this can also help prevent erosion in your garden. If you have an erosion problem during the wet months of winter, this can help hold that soil together. And again, we have cover crops in the home garden. That's HO324W, another excellent resource. I learned quite a bit reading through that one, so I can personally recommend that one as a good one. Houseplants. All right. Again, this is going to be one of those September-ish, maybe back into October. The key thing here is that our houseplants that we moved outdoors need to come back in before the night temperatures fall to 55 degrees. So that may be during September, that may be during October. The main thing is 55 degrees is the key thing to remember. Houseplants that are grown outside during the summer can have a tendency to drop some leaves when you bring them in, and this is kind of a response to light intensity. So you may consider some kind of acclimation of light when you're bringing them in. Maybe when they're outdoors, start darkening them up a little bit. When you transition them indoors, keep them in the brightest spot possible before you take them to a slightly darker spot. The main thing is you just got to get them accustomed to that lower light level. So gradually decrease it. And then you need to check and control insects and diseases before pulling them into the house, because if you bring a plant in that's diseased or is covered up in aphids or something, it's going to spread to all your other houseplants that you're bringing in. So you got to make sure they're clean before they come in. All right, here we are. We're in October. So what happens when those plants are dropping the leaves? Again, if they start dropping the leaves, let's think about kind of upping the light intensity. That may help them retain their leaves. You might consider providing some supplemental light if necessary. When you bring these plants in, you're going to need to water less frequently. They're going to need less water. They're going to be in a much more humid environment to start with. But, with a lower light intensity, they're just not going to cycle through as much water. This is also true for fertilizer. You may be actually able to completely discontinue fertilizing your plants when you bring them in for the winter. That's going to kind of be a thing that is kind of situational, but just keep in mind that when they come in, they need less water, they need less fertilizer. All right, like this one, playing in the dirt. So Purdue recommends to have your garden soil tested for fertilizer needs every 3 to 5 years. You can do it more often than that if you want to, if you're a little more obsessed about it like I am, but keep an eye on the fertilizer levels in your soil. You don't want that fertilizer level to be too high. You're going to have a salt buildup in your bed, and that is going to damage the plant roots. Fall is actually a time that we should think about doing some organic matter incorporation into our soils. This can help us kind of get past that hurdle of, it's springtime, it's raining. How do I do any soil work in my garden? Well, let's take advantage of that in the fall. Let's take advantage of the warmer, dry weather to let us do some soil work. I included a soil meter in this picture because this is a topic that I could go on for a long time. I could give this entire hour talk on soil meters. A lot of my professional career has been EC and pH monitoring in all kinds of different situations for plant production. If you're really obsessed and you really want to know what's going on with your fertilizer levels, you can consider buying one of these EC pH combo probes. Checking on Amazon, my favorite one that I've got a lot of experience with, this is the Hanna Instruments combo probe. It runs about $125. If you take care of the probe, I've used one of these things for about 5 years before I had to replace it. What does this allow you to do? So these probes are going to allow you to do a lot of spot checking on your pH in the ground, your pH in your pots, and to me, more importantly, EC. What is EC? EC stands for electrical conductivity. It is a measure of salt that is present in your soil. What is the salt that we're putting on in a garden? Fertilizer. So an EC value will give you a good representation of how much fertilizer, how much nutrients we have left in the soil. So that can be in ground or in a container. So for an example, I'm going to show you how easy it is to use one of these probes to do a EC or pH test. If you just want to test your garden soil, what you'll need is a probe, some kind of cup, some distilled water, and the media, the soil that you're testing. You're going to put that soil in a cup. You're going to add distilled water until you don't want it to be floating, but you want to add enough moisture where you can stick that probe down in there and you can see water. And then you're going to take a reading. So what does that reading mean? With pH, it's really easy. We can all see pH recommendations all over the place for what our garden soil can be. The EC, we can find some recommendations, but that one's a little bit harder. With the EC, what we should do with EC is we should track it over time. That number doesn't mean anything to you until you know, okay, this plant likes my EC to be at 1.5. Let's say a woody plant likes it a little bit less. Our flowering plants, our petunias, our pansies, and stuff like that, we need it a little bit higher. We need an EC of 2.5. So what we do is we keep track of the things that look good. And then next year, we know what that EC should be. So if we come back and we see, oh, these looked really good last year with an EC of 2.5, and I take a measurement and it's only 0.5, what does that mean? It's time to fertilize. So this is how we can use this simple tool to really help us fine-tune our fertilization and our pH control in our garden. Again, if you have any questions about that whatsoever, get in contact with me. I have tons and tons and tons of experience doing these tests. All right, October, we can think about pruning our bleeders. So these are our plants that have a heavy sap flow, and were we to prune them earlier in the year, we could have a lot of sap flow that's not harmful to the plant, but kind of unsightly. It may drip on our people, our cars, our pets. So these are plants like birch, dogwood, elms, maples, walnuts. These are plants that we need to wait a little bit later in the year to do the pruning on, so that we can kind of avoid some of that unsightly stainage that we can get on our tree if we prune them when they're heavy in sap flow. Clean your containers. This is a big one. So in October, we're probably wrapping up our containers. We're emptying them out and we're ready to store them. But before you store them, it is a good idea to get all that dirt out of there, as well as give them a little quick soak in bleach. So we don't want to harbor any pathogens over winter. So we're going to soak those pots in a solution of about 1 part bleach to roughly 9 parts of water. Let them sit in there for about 10 minutes. And then we're going to rinse them in a solution of dish detergent and water, just to rinse that bleach off of them, so the bleach doesn't damage the plastic. And then when we can use a steel wool or a stiff wire brush to clean the clay pots, because the clay pots are much more porous. We need to get those all that dirt that could harbor any contaminants out of those pores and thoroughly clean that. This is something when I worked at the greenhouse that they took very seriously. So our production people that really know what they're talking about, this is something they do as well. If they are reusing a pot, it will be cleaned. It will be sanitized, because it's much easier to clean than it is to try and save that plant from some kind of infection. All right, I'm not going to lie, I had to group November through January because there's less to do during these months, obviously. So let's get in there. So let's check on those houseplants. First of all, we need to keep an eye on them. So we need to look for browning. We need to look for dry edges. This is going to indicate that the humidity for these plants is getting a little low. We're running heat in our house during the winter, and that's going to dry out the air. And that can in turn kind of desiccate the plant material. So we can increase the humidity by running a humidifier. We can group our plants together because these plants are breathing, they're respiring, which releases moisture. So if we group our plants together tightly, then what that'll do is it'll kind of create a little micro environment there of more moist air. Think of a rainforest. Or we can use a pebble tray. Pebble tray is exactly what it sounds like. Tray, pebble, put water in it. What that does is the pebbles slow the evaporation of that water, and it just kind of creates, like we said, a more humid environment to kind of keep the moisture in the air for our house plants. We can move plants closer to windows as we begin to worry about light intensity. If we're seeing that yellowing, but we need to make sure that we're not pressing foliage up against cold glass. That's kind of a thing to keep an eye on. Don't burn your leaves because it's 20 degrees outside and our tropical plants are smack up against the glass. And again, supplement with artificial lighting as needed. Once again, we need to remember, I harp on this, but we need to remember not to overwater and not to over fertilize during these months. I'm sure we can all confess to killing houseplants because we got them too wet. I've done it. We've all done it. So again, water as needed. Don't just assume they need water. Check it first. Tool maintenance. I'm big on this one. So this is a good time of year to spend working on our tools. We invest a lot of money in these tools sometimes, and it is very important to keep them in good shape. So anything with a hinge, let's get that hinge oiled up. That's for your own comfort. Example, these hand pruners, the smoother that action is, the easier it's going to be on your hand. So hand pruners, loppers, shears, anything like that, make sure you're getting some oil down in that hinge. Don't forget about your motorized equipment. Don't let that motor sit there all winter without starting it. Run it every now and again. I was kind of always taught to start the motor at least once a month if it hasn't been used in a while. Sharpen all bladed tools. This is a key one. A sharp knife, a sharp blade will make a clean cut. A clean cut is easier for a plant to heal. So pruners, I'm sure we've all tried to chop through something with our pruners or our loppers that was far too big, and we even kind of dented our blade a little bit. Sharpen that blade or replace it. A lot of these pruners have replaceable blades, and they're not that expensive, and they're not that difficult to replace. In the picture there, we have a pair of Felco pruners. Very, very nice pruners. My favorite pruner. I have completely rebuilt that pruner. That's the Cat's Meow pruner. It is just kind of an industry standard of quality, and I've completely rebuilt that, and it was exceedingly easy. The blade for the Felco 2 pruner, I think it was less than $10. So, pop a new blade on there if you need to. Shovels and spades. Digging's a lot easier with a sharp spade. And it's also a lot easier to get through any root material you may encounter in the ground with a sharp spade. You can sharpen by hand, or you can sharpen by bench grinder. Just so long as you know that if you use that bench grinder, you will no longer be sharpening by hand. If you use a bench grinder, it'll temper the blade. It heats up and it'll temper the blade, and it'll no longer be soft enough for a hand file to actually sharpen. So just keep that in mind. A bench grinder is fine, but you're not going to go back and forth. Don't get salty. So what happens in December, January? Snow, ice, and we're all putting salt out to save ourselves from that inevitable fall. Or I'm sure we've all been to Lowe's after they've scooped up all the snow and pushed all that snow and ice directly into their shrubs in the landscape. It melts, and what do we see? Burnt plants. So we need to be mindful of what we're doing with that salt that we've put on our driveway, that we've put on our sidewalks. We need to make sure that's not getting on the plant material. You can construct a screen of burlap, or actually I've seen just plants completely wrapped up in burlap and protected that way to kind of keep the salt spray from our feet or from vehicles from splashing onto the plant material. We have a resource again at Purdue that has a list of salt sensitive plants in it. So this resource, Salt Damage on Landscape Plants, ID 412W, has a good list in it that will tell you which plants do we need to particularly keep an eye on during this time that are more susceptible to salt than others. And they also have some more tips in there. So that's a good resource that'll help us deal with, if our HOA or our condo community is putting down too much salt and it's burning your plants, there's a good list of management tips there. February, this is the last month I'm going to talk about in this presentation. So remember all those bulbs that we dug up earlier? We need to keep an eye on those. We need to make sure that they're not rotting. Like I said in the separate bullet point there, rot will spread. Don't lose your entire stored crop because of one plant. So we need to check for rot occasionally. We need to look for shriveling, make sure they've not dried out too much. And on the other side of the coin, we need to make sure they're not sitting in moisture and just rotting again, because that moisture is going to lead to rot. So check the moisture level, get rid of anything that is in bad shape. So don't lose your entire crop that you've worked so hard to grow and then dig up and then store because one of them starts to rot. Keep an eye on them. Plan your garden. This is an exciting time for me. I love planting the garden. So we need to make plans for this year's garden design and plant material. You know, we need to think about, are we going to put any woodies in, or are we going to make any new beds? Why is this important? Because we need to order early. If we are ordering plant material, we need to do so as soon as possible. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the plant availability issues the last couple of years. It's kind of sad going to the garden center this year and not getting any of my favorite plant material. So the sooner you can put an order in, the sooner you can guarantee that you're going to get the plant material you want. Are you a self-starter? Are you starting seeds? We need to think about getting together our seed trays, our soil. We need to order seeds. We can start some seeds in February. We need to start the cool season vegetables, so they'll be ready to transplant in the garden early in the season. So that's stuff like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. You know, these things take 5 to 7 weeks. So you really need to plan. That goes back to your garden planning, how early you need to start those seeds in order to get them into the garden on time. So your garden infrastructure, things like your planter boxes, check the wood. Make sure you don't have any boards that need to be replaced. You know, it's a lot easier to get this done before you're in there trying to plant. So, you know, check your trellises, your cages, your tomato cages, make sure everything's in good shape. You know, this is kind of getting close to spring here. So this is kind of your last opportunity to get ahead. Look at your infrastructure. And again, I harp on it, but service your mower. Beat the rush. You know, everybody's going to be wanting to get their mower blade sharpened or their motor tuned up and oil changed when they need to cut grass, but get it done early. Beat everybody else to it.
Hey, Carrie, we got a question in the chat about for caladiums and such that are stored in boxes, what kind of boxes, plastic or cardboard?
I would do plastic. I would not do cardboard because there is a certain amount of moisture that's going to be present. Yeah, I would stick away from cardboard unless it's some kind of like waxed treated cardboard. You know, there is the waxed cardboards because a lot of times they'll ship caladium bulbs in waxed cardboard, but that is to prevent the moisture that's going to be present in the storage from rotting out your cardboard and just letting go. So I prefer plastic, but keep in mind that, again, they are going to be wet.
Thank you. And then there was one more question about recommendations for places to repair my loopers. Someone recommended Sullivan's Hardware Store because they do the sharpenings. Did you have any other recommendations for like hinges or other places?
No, you know, I was going to say, you know, the Ace Hardwares, and, you know, around here, that's the Sullivan's, you know, they do a lot of that repair work. Really, you're just looking for any kind of tool repair place. I'm not sure that I would recommend any one over the other than, you know, question them, make sure they know what they're doing first. But yeah, that's actually a very good recommendation.
Thank you. That's all the questions for now.
All right. Well, I want more conversation. So I'm going to open it up. I want to hear from everybody. What are you doing during the fall and the winter to help get ready for the spring? Or if you have any other questions about the presentation, let's open it up to that too.
I have a question.
Sure.
Shirley Fry. You mentioned about cleaning the sanitation. There's always a balance between cleaning up very well or leaving enough stuff for the insects and things to overwinter. Have you got any advice about that?
Well, the biggest thing, you know, we're talking about there are our pots and our containers. So the best thing to do is just get as much dirt out of those containers as possible. Remove as much of that organic material out of there as you can.
No, not the containers, in the garden.
Oh, in the garden. Sure. Yeah. So for that, we're doing what we can. We will never, ever get that perfect. But the key there, the takeaway that I wanted you to take away there is that, if we are aware of disease issues, get them out of your garden. That will only help you reduce the disease load in your garden. So don't let, brush pile up, limbs and stuff like that, because,
I just start typing.
the beetles can kind of overwinter in the limbs, the leaf material, that kind of thing. The same thing. Any organic material that is no longer growing, just remove it, because that is a source of pathogens. Good question. Thank you.
Carrie,
Yes.
I am not Philip Coons, but I'm watching with him. I'm Elizabeth Bowman.
Sure.
I want to know about something I do in the fall that I have questioned. Each year I try to remove as many of the autumn leaves coming down from the trees as possible in my garden. I have been concerned about them harboring pathogens over the winter, but I'm concerned that maybe I am reducing the amount of nutrition I'm giving to the soil by removing that organic material.
Sure.
What is your take on like cleaning out fall leaves from flower gardens? These are perennial flower gardens.
Sure.
Should I remove some, nearly all?
So
What should I do?
yeah, so that goes back to a question of plant anatomy and the process in the fall that happens in the leaves. So if we think about, why do the leaves on plants turn colors in the fall? That
They lose
is
their sap and they lose their chlorophyll.
exactly. So that is the tree removing all of that nutrient content from those leaves before it sheds those leaves down. So realistically, leaf material provides very, very little nutrient content to the soil as they decompose. So we're not going to lose a lot of nutrients when we remove leaf litter. But what that does is, if we leave that leaf litter, we do have the potential to allow certain insects to harbor within that material. Or like you said, if there were any diseases on those trees, that does provide a source of pathogen in our yard. That's more important if we know that we have some plant issues, like if we know we had anthracnose or something on our maples, maybe then we need to be a little bit more concerned about removing that plant material. But yeah, that's a good question. We're not really gaining a lot of nutrient content from leaf litter.
Thank you.
I had a question.
Sure.
I don't know if you can see me. So you had said in, oh, shit, which month that was? In September, maybe it was October, but about that was the time to prune back trees like maples and just like bleeding trees. My question is though, what would actually be like the ideal time to actually prune back trees? I'm concerned that I don't want to leave it to have like a gaping wound as it gets into like the cold temperatures, or should I prune them a little bit earlier so they're not like storing sap? Or yeah, I don't know when is the best time to prune some of these trees.
So when I was in the nursery industry, those guys do a lot of pruning on those trees to create a nice full tree.
Yeah.
And they used to joke around that me from UK, I get there and I tell them what time of year is the best time of year to prune them. But they'd say the best time of year to prune is the time of year that you have time to do it.
Fair enough.
So
yeah.
It is nice to think that if we do that in the fall, that leaves them a little bit more time to heal that wound before the winter.
Yeah.
But realistically, there's no real wrong time of year to prune. There may be times of years that are a little bit better than others. But again, it becomes a question of when can you get to it. And that's kind of why I like in the fall for pruning. You know,
Yeah.
it allows us to see the structure of that tree more if we've already
Yeah.
dropped those leaves. And again,
Mhm.
pruning is an art.
Yes,
It is sculpting a living thing.
Yes.
If we prune it here, it's going to start growing over here. So we have
Mhm.
to picture, I make a cut here, in the future it's going to go this way. So
Mhm.
to me, it helps in the fall because I get a better structure in my head. I can see the bones of that plant.
Okay.
And yeah, it lets us, for those heavy sappers, it lets us have that sap flow be a little bit slower, and it gives it a little bit of time to kind of work on that wound before we kind of get into the cold months. Yeah.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you.
Gary, there's a few questions in the chat. If you can see it, one of them's kind of long, but then a shorter one is, what is the best time to transplant hostas?
Hostas. Okay. So we can do that spring or fall. Well, realistically, you could probably do that in the summer as well if you provide enough irrigation. Remember, I kept discussing keeping newly transplanted material irrigated. Hostas are obviously a shade plant, preferably. So we just kind of need to keep an eye on them. So, you know, I have successfully personally transplanted many hostas spring and summer. Fall, you know, probably early fall is okay. I might not do just a ton of that after September. You know, that gives them a little time to get established before October. But yeah, sure.
Another question about raspberries. When pruning raspberries, do I cut the only stem? I bought and planted some this year. They never produce fruit as expected. However, the raspberry plant is one stem and long and falling over.
So with raspberries and blackberries, you know, we have two different kinds of canes. We have floricanes and primicanes. One produces fruit, one doesn't. So the key thing to take away is, did it produce fruit this year on this cane? If so, yeah, let's take that thing back down to the stem, that, you know, bound to the main trunk of the plant, and cut it off down there. The ones that you're leaving are actually going to be producing next year's fruit. So, you know, these things are growing, they need a year, and then the following year they produce the fruit. So once they've already produced fruit, they're not going to do it again. So we're going to cut that one off, because all it's going to do is harbor insects, and that is an issue in raspberry production. I hope that makes sense. I hope that was coherent enough for you.
That was an interesting answer. I didn't even know that. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
Another question. I'm just going to stick with the pruning questions, group them
Sure.
together. I have leggy overgrown roses. When is the best time to prune? How far is too far to cut them back? They flower every year, but have not adequately been pruned.
So roses are one of those that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on how and when to prune. I've not personally gone through Purdue's material on roses yet. You know, I've not quite had the time to research Purdue's official recommendation. The only recommendation I can give is, you know, if the structure of that plant is a little bit leggy, if it's a little bit unsightly, you can probably cut them back fairly far. I don't want you to cut your shrub down to 2 inches. Don't do that. But again, like we were just discussing, you know, pruning being an art form, you need to think about, okay, if I cut it here, it can start filling out this empty area here. So you can be moderately aggressive with them, but leave enough plant material there that it can photosynthesize. It has enough plant material, enough leaf material there to grow out of it. If you'd like, I can't see who asked this question, but you
It
know,
was Valerie Scott.
so Valerie, you know, if you would like, you can email me and I can see what I can find from Purdue's recommendation. They may have a rose pruning guide, and that, you know, that sounds kind of like what you need there to kind of help you to make decisions there. But yeah, reach out and I can see if I can find some publications for you.
Okay. And another question, can I direct sow Shasta daisy seeds in the ground? When is the best time to do this? Will they come back every year and multiply?
Sure. So Shastas are a perennial. They'll come back. Actually did some Shasta seeding this year myself. You can direct seed them. A funny tidbit on that, you know, like I said, I grew some Shastas this year. I put them in seed trays, and I was doing it out on my back porch, and my little packet of Shasta seeds blew out into my flower bed, and they started to sprout in my flower bed. So yeah, they can be direct seeded. Best time of the year to do this, follow the packet, see what the packet says, because I think that's going to kind of vary a little bit on variety. But yeah, look at the back of the packet, see if they give a sow by date on there. But yeah, they'll absolutely direct sow, they'll spread, and because I think they self seed a little bit, and they should come back. You know, again, that's a question of variety because they should be hardy, but yeah, they absolutely should come back.
And then we have a question about any recommendations for cleaning the rust off garden tools.
There's some guides out there for rust removal. The best thing to do is not let it form in the first place, but you know, you can always remove what you can with a rust remover. There are, you know, spray products out there, but you can also kind of take a really stiff bristle brush and start kind of working it off to kind of scrape it off. But yeah, I would recommend, ideally don't let it start. I'm having flashbacks to, I used to get lectures. You know, I spoke a little bit about my old nurseryman, previous supervisor at University of Kentucky, and you know, he had all these recommendations. Yeah, that one I would have to look a little bit more into to get you a real solid answer on that. So if you want to reach out to me on that one as well, I can absolutely look into that for you.
Thank you. I want to read 2 comments because I remember this is being recorded and they
Sure.
probably won't be able to see the chat. So Pam shared that I found costas to be hardy and I've transplanted them anytime they are up. I once had one survive over winter in a clay clump. Another comment was made by Heather. She said with roses, there are some great pruning videos from David Austin Roses. He's a grower, and from Grace Rose Farm. Rose Farm is based in California. These videos were very helpful to Heather.
Absolutely. I am a strong proponent of YouTube learning. You know, I have operated an educational YouTube channel before. There's a lot of excellent resources we can find on the internet, video wise. The thing to keep in mind, you know, the California pruning video is probably very good. Just keep in mind where you're watching the video. You know, they may have a little bit different climate issues than we have. So that's a key thing to keep in mind for the educational content you find online, is make sure it's nice and relevant to your local climate. Then I do see the what oil do we use on the hinges?
Yes.
You know, that's another one of those preferential things. I've been told to use like a heavyweight oil, like just put a single drop. It's hard to find those little oil droppers nowadays. I've been trying to find one for a while, but a nice heavyweight. And again, I can't think of what you call that stuff. I don't know that I would go with like a mineral oil or anything like that on some of these tools. I fear that mineral oils and stuff like that will kind of lead to some rusting issues. But like a 10W or a 15W, or even with some of those heavier 20W weight oils that kind of are thick enough to stay in the hinge. I think that's kind of the important thing there, is the heavier the oil, the longer it's going to hang around, but just to get a nice drop down in there. All right. Any other questions? Well, I'm not seeing any more.
I have one more question. I'm so sorry.
Sure, no, not a problem.
Composting recommendations for compost in winter when it's freezing and there's no heat. Yes.
Let me get some resources to you. I know we have some recommendations there. Shoot me an email with that one.
Okay.
Can I share my experience, Carrie?
Yeah, Alex, please.
Yeah, so I compost. My colleagues, our colleagues in A&R, they've got me interested, or they got me started with vermicompost. So I started my bin outside in the summer and it had no worms in it. Then as the winter was coming, I got some worms and added it to it, put it in a different bin and kind of put it under my kitchen sink. And it's been doing really well. It's on a smaller scale than I would do if I had kept it outside, but
Yeah.
it still works for me. And I have compost that I can use later in the season.
Ooh, that's smart. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, oh, I see one more here. Have a cabbage worm issue every growing season. I'm a chemical-free gardener. Is there something I can do in the winter to prevent them? So if you're not wanting to use chemicals, then that kind of takes us to the principle of exclusion. So, that goes back to make sure we're not harboring anything. And then, I'm not sure what your production looks like, but, maybe we can, think about tenting or something like that. Is this, let's see, let me read that again. It doesn't say what you're seeing it on, but, again, that I think that kind of harkens back to the idea of just sanitization. Make sure we're not giving any of these insects any opportunity to kind of survive somewhere in the winter. But broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, yeah, kind of the things you'd expect. There are some beneficial insects out there. I've seen a little bit of research on beneficial insects, but then the question becomes, okay, do they just fly away? But it becomes a little difficult. What can I use during the growing season on the plants? Valerie, reach out to me. Let's chat about this. And maybe I can find some better resources they're less on the chemicals. I'll admit that my experience is a little bit more on the chemical side, but let's see if we can find you some resources. Okay.
Jared, do you want to put your email in the chat for
Sure.
people?
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. Let me just type that in there. So my email is cagrable@purdue.edu. Let me just pop that right in there. Yeah, please feel free to reach out with any questions. There's plenty of things I don't know the answer to, but I sure do know how to research, and I can find the answers for you. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for being at my very first Purdue presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and see if we can stop the
And the
share.
slides are going to be available, right?
Yes, I can make the slideshow available. Absolutely.
Okay.
All righty. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.